every urban local body, every municipality, every state government and the central government will tell you that there is no land in the city. There is a shortage of land. Of course, they are maybe entitled to say it in a city like Bombay. Even there, they would be actually a little far away from the truth. But in a town like Lucknow or maybe Guwahati, does it hold? But it's always there, and as a matter of fact, this interpretation of the truth that there is no land gives policymakers, urban planners a handle for saying that people must live in flats that go upwards. So then you are optimizing the use of land as you go upwards. So this is a notion of optimization and functionality. And in a queer sense also aesthetics. How do you make high rises look good? But from the point of view of the people who will live in those flats, there are many problems associated, particularly for poor people. I mean, poor people are also working people. So supposing she is a vegetable seller and she therefore takes vegetables every day to come and sell at your house, maybe my house, and then she goes back to this flat up on the 4th floor. Where does she put her cart? What does she do with her vegetables? You know, does she trudge up 4 floors with them? You know, these are ideas of energy, conservation of energy also, and there's an aesthetics to it. You know, you use the minimum amount of energy to get your work done, and how does that embody itself in your life? So poor people generally don't want to go into flats. They also see that that means if the water is not coming into your tap, you'll have to go down, fill your bucket and then haul it up again, stuff like that. So they would in a sense challenge the idea of, is there no land in the city? You know, instinctively. And they would also see it in terms of, they'll say, you know, next to our basti, there's this empty plot of land, there's another empty plot of land, there's a more land. We never seem to get it. But if an office complex has to be built, if a petrol pump has to be built, if a flyover has to be built, land never seems to be a problem. So is it that there is no land, or is it that there is no land for us, but there is land for somebody else? So it's a way of having to negotiate with the truth as you see it and the truth as the policymaker sees it, as the urban planner sees it, and trying to find how do you live within that context. See, I think it's a language problem. It's a problem of grammar and syntax, because in order to engage with something you need to understand. If you don't understand it, you're not likely to be able to engage with it either. So, I mean, at different levels, like for example, they say we will do people's participation whether they want this project or not. So they'll do a public hearing, you want this project or not, raise your hands. See, that's not participation. People have to know what the project is. Only then, this is then informed participation. And to understand what the project is, it cannot be in the language of the project proposer, because he speaks a different language. It has to be in the language of the people who are going to either benefit, suffer, engage with the project. So they have to understand, what is this project? This is going to make cement. For whom? How much cement? Where is it going to come from? What is it going to do to these cliffs? Where is the stone going to come from? How is it going to be transported? How much pollution will each of these trucks create? So they have to understand. If they don't understand, how will they engage with it? How will they give a positive public response? So I think that understanding comes first. Many years ago, a friend of mine developed a solar cooker. So he made a parabolic mirror and out of metal, and he suspended a vessel at the focal point, and he took it to a village mela near Nagpur to show it to people, village people. What did they think of this great new idea? So a lot of people clustered around and said, what the hell is this? First you explain to us what is this. So he explained it, how the rays focus, how you have to keep shifting the focus in order it comes at a point, how that heats up the water and so on. And the moment he started doing it, then engagement started. Somebody said, he was a book binder. He said, you made this thing out of metal. Metal is going to be very heavy and it's going to cost a lot. So why don't you do something else? So he said, you make it out of papier mâché and line it with this thin polythene film that you get, this reflective film. So it will become lighter, it will become cheaper. So my friend thought that was a good idea, but he said, then how will I make it perfectly symmetrical? Because it has to have that. So there's a potter who said, oh, simple, I'll just make you a pot of that size. You slap it onto the surface of the pot, you'll get your symmetry. But you have to give me the dimensions of the pot, how to make it. I'll make it for you. And he said, because it's on a pot, it will be symmetrical. Then they came up, but the papier mâché will collapse, it's weak. How do you strengthen it? So there's a basket weaver. He said, I'll weave you a basket, which will fit that. You put it inside there. So you can do that. Then the question, how do you suspend the pot in the center? So there's a cycle repair fellow. He said, oh, very simple. There are these cycle rims. You keep it at the top, and this has holes where the spokes are. So from those holes, you can suspend the pot.
Suppose we forget about this large abstraction called truth and we focus instead on truth telling. Truth telling along with storytelling. Now, the old woman who tells a story to the walls is truth telling and she's storytelling. Now, this is of course essentially a problematic situation because when we think of truth, we tend to think of it in terms of one solid color. It is there. It's like the word of God. It's just there. And story, we tend to think of as gray, as suggestive, as full of hints, as sometimes self-reflexive, and so on and so forth. In short, a much more adaptable and, by the same token, a less reliable creature than truth. But I want to suggest that if we look at truth-telling and storytelling together, as if they are siblings in the same room, we might actually get something out of it. What I'm getting at is that we've spoken about multiplicity. It's impossible to be a writer or an artist anywhere, I think, and certainly in India, if you do not, if you are not aware of multiplicity continuously. But how do you escape what I see as a cop-out of saying everything is relative? I simply don't buy that, because as a writer who is constructing this world of one novel, I'm very clear, finally, through all my narrative strategies, including structure, of what perspectives, what truths, in the plural, specific truths, I'm going to privilege. There's no getting away from that. And the author, that is why the author will never die, because this world, this alternate world you are constructing to look at the truth of the real world comes from you. So suppose I use the world of tales to explain this. Take a debate. I mean, our tales debate all the biggies, whether it's the afterlife or incest, all the issues that trouble any society. In our tales, for example, say on the question of incest, you have the Oedipus motif. So you have tales which tell you about a young man who ends up marrying his mother, and you know how terrible it is, and so on and so forth. Okay, that is one perspective. That is one narrative of the truth. On the other hand, you also have a story which says, well, you know, they've had children and they're quite happy, and you know, it's a pity and shouldn't have happened, but it has happened, and life must go on. So you also have a story which helps you deal with the rigidities of truth, which tells you it is also possible to continue. And similarly with the afterlife. So you might have you know, a perspective which tells you in, you know, sort of awesome terms what the afterlife is, but you also have a tale such as the one about the guru who tells his shishya, look, I've looked into the future and I'm going to die soon, and I'm going to be born as a piglet, part of a big litter, and you will recognize me by a mark on my neck. Please, you know, slit my throat, because obviously you don't want your guru to live as a piglet. And the shishya agrees. And finally, when the shishya, it all comes to pass, and when the shishya is about to slit the piglet's throat, the guru's voice comes out of the piglet saying, no, 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 don't do it. And the shishya says, but why? You know, you don't want to live as a piglet. He says, but that was before I knew the pleasures of wallowing in the dirt. You know, so the tales, in a way, through multiple perspective, through play, and play is very, very important for the writer and for the artist, because this is one different way in which you are looking at truth. Let's play, let's pretend, you know. Those are the key things. Suppose we play and then we discover about ourselves and about the world, and then of course, by accident if you like, a glimmer of the truth. So it's not so much that truth itself shifts. It's not so much that we stand on a ground which is continuously shifting. I don't think we should fall into that trap. To me, that would be pointless. To me, it would mean then that my enterprise of writing a novel which attempts to do certain things, you know, to understand certain puzzling aspects of the human experience, the whole thing is pointless. To me, it is important that I have these multiple perspectives, this confusion, if you like, and then I step in there to give order to it. But obviously, the order I give to it is dependent on my own layers of truth in my head. You could call it my politics, you could call it my location, whatever. But it is very clear that when I say I am going to put in multiple voices, multiple narratives, above, below, male, female, and so on and so forth, while I understand the narratives are mutable, while I understand the narratives are, you know, in some fundamental sense incomplete, still, to the extent that I have control over the entire work of art, I am making sure that I privilege, I foreground, I emphasize certain points of view which come together along with the counter narratives to express my take on this particular slice of reality. And I think finally that is how I would sum up the artist's truth. Both of you. I haven't thought about all this for a long time.
See, I have a slight problem with the whole notion of truth by itself. It's very absolute. And I don't know that I want to say that there is such a thing as absolute truth. So in my book, I play around with that. At every single point in my book, there is somebody whose point of view is being adhered to. Here and there, I might skip and move from one character to another, but by and large, chapter-wise, there's one person whose version is coming across. Because it occurred to me that that's the most that you can do. And as I say at some point in the book, that everyone has a bias, and the only thing you can do is be clear about what your bias is. If I say that this is my version of truth, then you know where I'm coming from. If you know that it's a young convict's idea of truth, you know where he's coming from. Or even a cameraman, as we're dealing with in my book. Here we have the same issue, that we thought that we're getting something registered onto a CD or a tape or whatever, but we know how much choice we exercised before we got to that. So what were our interests? We wanted light. We wanted a little bit less of noise. We had to manipulate the environment to get that, so that we could play around with something. We did not delude ourselves that what we are getting is any absolute truth. So that's one thing. What is truth? Truth is what you can see, what you can hear yourself. You don't even know for sure what you're hearing or what you're seeing, but you believe what you see. There are a lot of things in this world we believe in. For example, have you ever seen an atom? Have you ever seen a molecule? There are quite a lot of light outside the visible spectrum. As human beings, we can't see it. We call it the visible spectrum simply because it's tuned to what we human beings or retinas or brains are ready to process. But there's all of that. We have limited ourselves to certain things that interest us, which have to do with our lives and making them somewhat better. But how do we know for a fact that there are atoms? How do we know that the world is not flat? There is a little bit of trust involved, and trust comes in to the picture in a very big way. So truth seems to be a mixture of what you can see, and you have to be very clear who you are and what you're seeing, what your choices are, what your biases are, and who you trust. And beyond that, you have to admit that there may be other truths. But you may also make a very solid judgment that there's something flawed about that truth for your purposes, or maybe for a lot of people's purposes. So you build a notion of truth on all of these things. So the issue comes up when we talk of education. Education in the sense of this very, very corporatized thing that we now have in this world, where there are certain so-called truths that you wish to push onto the children, you wish to test them, and the truths are going to be testable things. Do they know it? Have they absorbed this particular item of information which you think is so valuable, and may be valuable only because it helps you control these children? Do you have a notion that your education should lead them to questioning you, questioning the entire value system, dreaming, seeing something completely new? That's not there for many people. Many people, I have parents coming to me and saying, make my kid creative. And yet, what would they like their kid to be? Not creative. Not creative in the sense of struggling always to earn a living, to put across a strange point of view. They want creative because it's something very sexy as an add-on to a perfectly muggle frame of mind. Now, the truths that you want to push on to kids, they tend to be for the purposes of control. And the truths that you do not want to push on to kids, which if you are lucky, a child will step up and say and challenge you. And if you are okay with yourself, you say, this is awesome, I want to think about it. Let's all think about it, or maybe you want to take some time by yourself, but we are going to get back to this. This is very, very important. It's a special moment. That's not so in the normal system. I think what they had as a notion was, in the old Sanskrit age, was that there were people who lived in the forest who knew about herbs, and then there were Brahmins who knew about mantras. Could you possibly codify their knowledge and put it within the existing system so that you could own it? So you own these truths, but owning it meant that you also were going to put a lid on there being more of them until you really needed them. So here's a very important issue about creativity. New truths disturb. New truths are like violence. They are violence upon an existing system. The general thinking in the system is to control them, to can them, to get rid of them, and to keep artists frustrated but there, because there's going to be a day when you need them. There's going to be a day when everything you have thought is going to be proved wrong, and you need someone who can come up with new ideas. But that's not going to be everybody, because if that were everybody, you don't have a system. So there is going to be this again, this yin-yang tussle. So that's another aspect of truth, and new truths are new only as long as they serve a purpose. Then one day another one will come and seem to explain everything.
I have been, because I spend a lot of my time taking people to the ruins in Delhi, and we walk through and especially Mehrauli and Tughlaqabad area, these are my favorites. So I have suddenly realized that the way the past is presented to you in textbooks and the way the two cultures negotiated with each other over this long period, its representation in books and its representation in architecture are two different things altogether. Because one learns that the true arch arrived at Balban's time, and Balban's dies in the 13th century. 1240 Razia Sultan dies, and some years after that Balban dies. Balban, I think, is the last of the slave kings. So his grave and his mausoleum is believed to be the place where the true arch is used for the first time. But you look at buildings that were constructed at the time of Daulat Khan, whose late mid-Lodi period or toward the end of the Lodi period, or some of the buildings built in the early Mughal period. And you come across a very interesting situation. There is the true arch, but inside the true arch, there is the corbelled arch. And the corbelled arch is an arch which is stage 2. The first arch that was ever created by human beings were two vertical beams and pillars and a horizontal beam, the regular rectangular door. That was the first arch. Subsequent to that, there was a stage which is known as the corbelled. You had two vertical pillars, two stones that projected a little forward, then two pieces that projected a little more, then two more that projected a little more, and then a horizontal beam. So you got an inverted staircase kind of design. This further develops into the true arch. Now, the corbel has been in use in India for a very long time, very, maybe a couple of thousand years, maybe longer, all over temples, this, that and the other, and the different stages were very fixed. You had the lotus, you had the raised trunk of the elephant, and then the horizontal member. The true arch arrives, and the local artisan does not trust the true arch. It looks very, very delicate, it looks flimsy, it is not made of large pieces of stone, it is made of little pebbles and these wedge-shaped stones held together by plaster. And this large scale use of plaster is something new, of limestone and brick mortar plaster, that the local artisan, stonemason, is not familiar with. But he knows that if the building collapses, it will be his neck. So he creates the true arch as is given to him by the architect or given to him in the design, and inside he puts the corbel. Because he trusts the corbel, he says, you want that arch, I have given it to you, but if it falls, I am not going to be held responsible. For my security, for my satisfaction, I want that. And this goes on till the 16th century. From the 12th century to 16th century, the corbel and the true arch coexist. In Adam Khan's tomb, which is built in the 16th century, Akbar's time, both of them are there. So, this is what is happening. Things are not so clear. There is no, that this is the end of the Indian traditional style of building, and then now you have the Mughal style. No. What is known to us as the Mughal style has come in a long process of evolution that started in the 12th century. And you cannot draw a line, say this is where the Mughal thing begins, because in the earlier Mughal buildings and the late Lodi buildings there is no difference. Akbar is there, Humayun's time, Akbar's time, the buildings that are being built is only the Humayun's tomb that you can present as the Mughal structure. But what about Adam Khan's tomb, built at the same time? In terms of architecture, in terms of the design of the dome, etc., it is very clearly a Sultanate period structure, but built by Akbar. Or the Jamali Kamali Mosque, completed in the time of Akbar, in the time of Humayun. So there are these areas which do not fall into this or that category, and it's a long period. It's a long period of transition, where our two cultures are gradually coming to grips with each other. They are negotiating. And it's not only their architecture, it is their language, it is their food, it is their attire that is mixing together. History textbooks rarely talk about this. Very rarely do you get to see that, this is the truth was not so clear cut. The truth is never so clear cut. There are areas where things are fuzzy, things are not clear, and gradually they are mixing and evolving. And then, when you say Mughal architecture, you are talking of structures built by Shah Jahan, which is presented to you as the apogee of Mughal architecture. But Mughal architecture begins with Humayun. What essentially I am saying is that these are areas that one needs to be more sensitive to if you think that you need to understand the truth of how this country has evolved, its culture has evolved and all that. This process of fusion that has gone on uninterruptedly for thousands of years, that has to be recognized as the major prime mover of the evolution of the culture of this country. Never a single strand, never a dominant strand. That is the truth. At least that is how I look at the truth of Indian culture. that there is nothing that is ever dominant. It is constantly hundreds of strands pulling and pushing and merging and separating that create this melange that we know as Indian culture. And unfortunately today, in an effort to present a clear cut identity, we are taking away all this. We want things in small little tight capsules which can be popped every morning